Dr. Alan Thompson, one of the most respected surgeons at the prestigious Willowbrook Medical Center, was known for his precision in the operating room and his cold, detached demeanor. He prided himself on being a professional, someone who let nothing, especially emotions, interfere with his work. But there was another side to Dr. Thompson, a side that was whispered about among the staff but never openly acknowledged. Beneath his calm exterior, Dr. Thompson harbored deep-seated prejudices, particularly towards people of color. It was an ugly truth that over the years he had grown skilled at hiding, or so he thought. On this particular afternoon, as Dr. Thompson finished his rounds, he was already thinking about heading home. It had been a long day, filled with the usual stream of surgeries and consultations. He was looking forward to a quiet evening, far away from the constant demands of the hospital. As he was about to leave, a nurse hurried over to him, her face tense with urgency. "Dr. Thompson," she called, trying to catch her breath. "We have an emergency in the ER. A young woman, Angela Williams, is in critical condition. She's in severe pain and needs immediate surgery." Dr. Thompson barely looked up from the chart he was reviewing. "What's her condition?" he asked, his tone indifferent. "She's presenting with acute abdominal pain, likely a ruptured appendix, but is complicated by what looks like internal bleeding. We need to operate as soon as possible," the nurse explained. Finally, Dr. Thompson glanced up, his expression hardening as he processed the information. "And she's?" he asked, his voice trailing off, a loaded pause hanging in the air. The nurse hesitated, unsure of how to respond to his unspoken question. "Her name is Angela Williams, doctor," she said carefully. Dr. Thompson's gaze shifted back to the chart, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Find someone else to take it," he said coolly. "I'm done for the day." The nurse's eyes widened in shock. "But Dr. Thompson, she's in a lot of pain. We don't have much time." "You're the best surgeon on call." "I said find someone else," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "I'm not interested." Without waiting for a response, Dr. Thompson turned and walked away, leaving the nurse standing there, stunned and helpless. She had no choice but to relay the message back to the ER, where Angela was waiting, her face pale and filled with pain. Angela Williams, a woman in her early 30s, had been living with the sudden, excruciating pain for hours before she could make it to the hospital. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she had no idea just how bad it was. By the time she arrived at the ER, she was barely able to stand. The nurses had rushed her in, promising that a doctor would see her soon. But as minutes turned into hours, she realized that no one was coming. The pain was overwhelming, stabbing through her abdomen with every breath. She clutched her side, trying to keep the tears at bay. She had always been a fighter, someone who didn't let the world's harshness get her down, but today it was different. Today she felt utterly alone. When the nurse returned, her expression was tight with discomfort. "Ms. Williams," she said softly, "I'm sorry, but Dr. Thompson won't be able to see you. We're trying to find another surgeon, but it might take some time." Angela stared at her in disbelief. "What do you mean he won't see me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm in pain, real pain. I can't wait." The nurse's eyes filled with sympathy, but she didn't have the power to change what had been decided. "I know, and I'm so sorry. We're doing everything we can. Please just hold on a little longer." Angela couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had come to the hospital because she believed they would help her, that they would take her pain seriously. But now, as she sat in the cold, sterile room, she realized that she was being ignored, dismissed as if her life didn't matter. As the minutes ticked by, the pain became unbearable. Angela tried to stay strong, but the tears finally broke free, streaming down her face. She had never felt so powerless, so invisible. The world around her seemed indifferent to her suffering, and the one person who could help her had turned his back. In that moment, Angela didn't just feel the pain of her condition. She felt the weight of every injustice she had ever faced. It was a familiar ache, one she had learned to live with, but today it was too much. She was exhausted, defeated, and alone. The nurse, feeling both guilty and helpless after witnessing Dr. Thompson's dismissal of Angela, can't shake the image of Angela's pain-stricken face. She knows she has to do something, so she quietly suggests to Angela that she seek help from another doctor. "Try Dr. Reed," the nurse whispers. "She's in the East Wing. She'll listen, she's different." Angela, clutching her side in agony, forces herself to her feet. She doesn't have the strength to argue or ask questions. All she knows is that she needs help. And she needs it now. She's heard of Dr. Emily Reed, Rumors of her compassion and dedication spread like wildfire among patients. With whatever strength she can muster, Angela begins the painful journey across the hospital. The walk to Dr. Reed's office feels like an eternity. Each step sends shockwaves of pain through Angela's body, making her vision blur and her breath come in ragged gasps. Every few feet she has to stop, doubling over as the pain becomes too much to bear. She leans against the walls for support, her knuckles white from gripping them so hard. By the time Angela reaches the east wing, she's barely conscious. The world around her spins, and she feels herself teetering on the edge of darkness. Just as she reaches the door to Dr. Reed's office, her legs give out, and she collapses onto the cold tiled floor. Dr. Emily Reed is in the middle of reviewing a patient's chart when she hears the commotion outside her office. Without a second thought, she rushes out and finds Angela lying on the floor, her face contorted in pain. Dr. Reed's heart sinks at the sight, and she immediately calls for help. "Get Gurney now," Dr. Reed shouts, her voice cutting through the panic in the hallway. "We need to get her to surgery immediately." Within moments, a team of nurses arrives with a gurney, lifting Angela gently but swiftly onto it. Dr. Reed keeps pace with them as they rush toward the operating room, her mind racing with questions. How could a patient in such dire condition be left untreated for so long? She knows this is more than just a case of medical negligence. It's something far more sinister. As they prepare Angela for surgery, Dr. Reed tries to reassure her. "You're in good hands now," she says softly, though the anger in her voice is unmistakable. "We're going to take care of you." But even as she focuses on the procedure ahead, Dr. Reed is already thinking about what needs to be done once Angela is stable. She knows she cannot let Dr. Thompson's actions go unchallenged. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. This was a violation of the very oath they had all taken as doctors. And for Dr. Reed, there is no greater injustice than letting such behavior slide. As Angela is wheeled into the operating room, Dr. Reed steels herself. The surgery ahead is critical, but so is the fight that will follow. Dr. Thompson's callousness has put a woman's life at risk, and that is something Dr. Reed will not stand for. She vows to ensure that justice is served, not just for Angela, but for every patient who might suffer at the hands of prejudice. Dr. Reed, her emotions simmering beneath a professional veneer, seeks out Dr. Thompson after Angela is stabilized and moved to the ICU. She finds him in his office, reviewing patient files with an air of indifference. Without hesitation, she steps inside and confronts him directly. "Alan, we need to talk," she begins, her voice firm. Dr. Thompson glances up, sensing the seriousness in her tone but unfazed. "What you did today, refusing to treat that woman, was not only unethical but blatantly racist." Dr. Thompson leans back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Emily, you're overreacting. I didn't have time to waste on a patient who clearly needed a different level of care," he says dismissively. Dr. Reed steps closer, her eyes narrowing. "Don't try to justify it. We both know she needed urgent medical attention, and you chose to ignore her because of the color of her skin. That's not just neglect, it's malpractice. If anything had happened to her, the blood would have been on your hands." Dr. Thompson's confidence doesn't waver. "You're too emotional, Emily. Maybe that's why you're blowing this out of proportion. I made a judgment call. Besides, nothing happened, right? She's fine now, thanks to you." Dr. Reed's fists clench at his arrogance, but she knows arguing won't change his mindset. "You need to understand that your decisions have consequences," she says, her voice tinged with frustration. "This isn't just about one patient. This is about the integrity of our profession." Dr. Thompson waves her off, still confident that his reputation will shield him from any repercussions. "I've been here for years, Emily. You're not going to change anything." Dr. Reed leaves his office, her heart heavy with disappointment and anger. She knows Dr. Thompson won't take responsibility for his actions, but she's determined to ensure that he's held accountable. However, her thoughts are soon interrupted by an urgent call from the operating room. Angela's condition has taken an unexpected turn. What should have been a routine procedure as Dr. Reed rushes back to the operating room, she is informed that Angela's complications are severe. So severe that only someone with Dr. Thompson's expertise can save her life. In that moment, Dr. Reed faces a difficult choice. She knows that requesting Dr. Thompson's help could save Angela, but it also means putting aside her anger and frustration toward him. The welfare of her patient must come first, no matter how much she despises the idea of working with someone who so callously dismissed her earlier. As Dr. Reed enters the operating room, she swallows her pride and asks the nurse to page Dr. Thompson. Tell him it's an emergency, she says, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She knows this decision could mean the difference between life and death for Angela. Dr. Thompson receives the page and immediately recognizes the seriousness of the situation. He's faced with his own moral dilemma. Should he set aside his prejudices and help the woman he refused to treat earlier, or should he allow his biases to dictate his actions? The realization that his reputation could be on the line, coupled with the fear of failing the critical surgery, drives him to the operating room. For perhaps the first time in his career, Dr. Thompson feels the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, forcing him to confront the kind of doctor he truly is. When he enters the operating room, there is no time for words. Dr. Reed quickly briefs him on Angela's condition, and together they begin the intricate procedure. The tension is palpable, as both doctors work in silence, focused solely on saving Angela's life. As the surgery progresses, Dr. Thompson's hands move with precision and expertise. But there's a new emotion behind his actions, an awareness of the stakes beyond just the success of the operation. He knows that this moment could define his career, not just in terms of skill, but in terms of character. As the surgery begins, the room is charged with a sense of urgency. The beeping of machines and the quiet, determined movements of the medical team fill the space as they work together to save Angela's life. Dr. Thompson, now fully immersed in his role as a surgeon, puts aside his earlier prejudices and focuses entirely on the task at hand. Each incision, each movement is critical, and Dr. Thompson's hands move with precision and expertise. As the minutes turn into hours, he becomes increasingly aware of the responsibility he carries, not just for Angela's life, but for his own integrity as a doctor. The patient on the table is no longer just another case. She is a human being fighting for her life, and he is the one who holds her fate in his hands. As the surgery progresses, something shifts within Dr. Thompson. The anger and bias that clouded his judgment earlier begin to dissipate, replaced by a deep sense of duty and compassion. He starts to see Angela not as a black woman he initially dismissed, but as a patient who needs his help, someone who deserves the best care he can provide. The medical team follows Dr. Thompson's lead, sensing the shift in his demeanor. The tension that had gripped the room eases slightly as they see their leader fully engaged and determined to save Angela's life. Dr. Reed, working alongside him, notices the change in Dr. Thompson and feels a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this experience will leave a lasting impact on him. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the critical moment arrives. Angela's vital signs stabilize and the most dangerous part of the procedure is over. The team works to close the incision and ensure that everything is in place for Angela's recovery. As the surgery concludes, a collective sigh of relief fills the room. They've done it. Angela's life has been saved. Dr. Thompson steps back from the operating table, his hands trembling slightly from the intensity of the procedure. He looks at Angela, still unconscious but now stable, and feels a sense of fulfillment that he hasn't felt in a long time. It's a strange and unfamiliar feeling, one that both confuses and humbles him. As the nurses begin to clean up, Dr. Reed approaches Dr. Thompson. There's no need for words. Both know what has just transpired. Dr. Thompson nods at her, acknowledging her earlier challenge and his own internal battle. For the first time, he realizes that being a great doctor is not just about skill, but about compassion and humanity. The surgery is a success, but the true victory lies in the change that has begun within Dr. Thompson. As he leaves the operating room, he is no longer the same man who dismissed Angela earlier that day. He doesn't fully understand what has happened, but he knows that something significant has shifted within him. Angela's life has been saved, and in the process, Dr. Thompson has taken the first step. Dr. Thompson spends the days following the surgery in deep reflection. The hospital is bustling as usual, but for him, everything seems quieter, more introspective. He replays the events over and over in his mind. The initial dismissal, the tense confrontation with Dr. Reed, the life or death decision in the operating room, and most hauntingly, Angela's face as she lay unconscious on the table. He had saved her life, but the weight of his earlier actions sits heavily on his conscience. He begins to see his behavior in a different light, recognizing the prejudice that had been so deeply ingrained in him. It was a bias that he had never truly confronted until now, and it shakes him to his core. Dr. Thompson is a man who takes pride in his work and the lives he saves, but for the first time, he questions the kind of person he is outside of the operating room. As Angela's recovery progresses, she requests to meet the doctor who saved her life. When Dr. Thompson receives the message, a wave of anxiety washes over him. He knows this conversation will not be easy. Still, he feels a need to face Angela not just as her doctor, but as a man who owes her an apology. The day comes when Dr. Thompson walks into Angela's hospital room. The moment he steps in, an awkward silence fills the space. Angela is sitting up in bed, looking stronger than when he last saw her, but there's a seriousness in her eyes that he can't ignore. Dr. Thompson, usually so confident, feels a rare sense of vulnerability. "Thank you, Dr. Thompson," Angela says, her voice steady but carrying a weight of emotion. "Thank you for saving my life." Her gratitude is genuine, but it's what she says next that strikes him the hardest. "But I also want to tell you how much it hurt when you dismissed me. I was scared, in pain, and I felt like I didn't matter because of the color of my skin." Dr. Thompson feels a lump in his throat. For a moment, he's at a loss for words. He's faced life and death situations countless times, but this is different. This is personal. He gathers his thoughts knowing that this moment requires honesty, not the usual professional detachment he's used to. "I'm sorry, Angela," he begins, his voice soft but sincere. "I was wrong. I've been wrong for a long time. There's no excuse for how I treated you. You deserve better than that. Everyone does." The apology is heartfelt, and Angela can see the sincerity in his eyes. The anger she had felt is still there, but it's softened by the acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. They talk for a while longer, the conversation moving from the pain of prejudice to the hope for change. It's an emotional exchange for both of them, filled with honesty and the beginnings of healing. As the conversation ends, there's a sense of closure, but also a new beginning. Angela realizes that this experience has given her a voice, one that she's determined to use to advocate for others who might face similar situations. For Dr. Thompson, it's a wake-up call, a turning point in his life that will shape how he treats every patient, every person, from that day forward. He leaves Angela's room with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of purpose. This encounter has changed him in ways he never expected. And as he walks down the hospital corridor, he knows that the journey to becoming a better man has only just begun. As news of the surgery and the events leading up to it begin to circulate within the hospital, it sparks conversations that had long been avoided. Dr. Reed's bold decision to confront Dr. Thompson over his actions does not go unnoticed. Whispers of the incident echo through the corridors, gradually growing louder until they reach the ears of everyone from the janitors to the senior management. What started as a single act of negligence and prejudice quickly becomes a catalyst for a larger discussion about racism, ethics, and responsibility in the medical profession. These discussions lead to a ripple effect, prompting the hospital to examine its practices and culture. Staff members, inspired by Dr. Reed's bravery and Angela's ordeal, start to question the unspoken biases that might influence their own behavior and decisions. The hospital administration, recognizing the need for change, initiates mandatory training on diversity, equity, and inclusion for all employees. These sessions are designed not just to educate, but to challenge the underlying assumptions that can affect patient care. For Dr. Thompson, the experience marks the beginning of a profound transformation. He realizes that his actions, driven by prejudice, nearly cost a woman her life and tarnished his professional integrity. The weight of this realization pushes him to confront the beliefs he had long harbored. Seeking redemption,
Meanwhile,
he takes it upon
Angela's
himself to
recovery
participate
progresses steadily,
but the impact of her experience lingers. She feels a deep sense of gratitude for the care she ultimately received, but she is acutely aware that her initial rejection was rooted in systemic issues that go beyond just one doctor's prejudice. Determined to use her experience as a force for good, Angela begins to speak out. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful and inspiring tales, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from and how this story impacted you. Thank you for your support.